Morning. So today we're on the trail of Robin Hood. We're walking across some of the trails and locations Robin Hood was meant to be found. We're 7 miles north of Nottingham Castle. We are in Linby and outside the church of St Michael. Behind me I have Linby Cross. Linby Cross is quite unusual as it is one of 2 crosses in Linby, believed to be the boundary crosses of where the Sherwood Forest was meant to begin. It's also famous because it's on the start of a stream, so this stream is believed to be part of a holy well. So here in front is the second cross of Linby. As you can see, there's a little bit of restoration work happening to this cross. Here we are at a bridge. This bridge crosses the River Limbo. Now back in the day, before this bridge was actually here, this is meant to be the point where Little John and Robin Hood met. There was a pole that went across the river, and to get across it, Little John and Robin Hood, they fought with staffs until they were exhausted, until one fell in the river, and then they became best of friends and joined as merry men. This is a place that Allandale was meant to be found first by Robin Hood. Allandale was a minstrel, and he was found not being too happy for himself because he was in love with a lady called Ellen, but she was promised to a Norman knight. So Robin helped Allandale to marry his beloved in this church. Now this yew tree is famous for where Robin Hood carved his first bow, a magnificent bow that lasted him several years. This is a 12th century church. So there's some graves that are from the 1700s. Here lies the body of Richard, number 7th, died 1699. We head up the track towards Papplewick Hall and Robin Hood stables. So we arrived in Papplewick. This is the resting place of Allandale. Now this is in front of us is Papplewick Hall, built for the Right Honourable Frederick Montagu, one of the last Chancellors of the Exchequer before William Pitt in 1781. So we leave Papplewick Hall and we're going to head up the road towards Robin Hood stables. Now Robin Hood stables is on private land, on a private farm, but hopefully the farmer might let us get to see the stables itself. 12th century Newstead Abbey. This is a Masonic house that originally had an abbey. Most of that abbey stone was knocked down to build the house. In 1808 to 1814, the poet Lord Byron lived here. We've now entered Thieves Wood. The clergyman would be walking through these woods up to the Royal Palace at Clipston. They would be taking the King's taxes up to the palace. And this is the area that Robin Hood and his merry men would rob the clergyman of their money and give it to the poor. Thieves Wood is part of the Royal Lyndhurst Park. Now, like a royal park, that would be a hunting ground for the king. So the Forester Rangers were always on the lookout for poachers like Robin Hood and his merry men, trying to get the game, stealing it away from the king, which obviously the king wasn't happy with that happening. Now the path I'm on now is the King's Great Way, and this path used to go from Nottinghamshire Castle all the way up to the palaces and would go all the way through Sherwood Forest. Just on the side of the A60, a very busy road. There's a lot of cars going by. In front of me is the Shepherd's Stone. Now this is a memorial stone. This is for Elizabeth Shepherd, who was murdered at this spot. by Charles Rotherham. After throwing Elizabeth's body in a ditch, Charles Rotherham headed towards Nottingham. Along the way, he tried to sell her umbrella and shoes several times, but failed. Eventually he was caught in Loughborough and was taken back to Nottingham, where he was trialled and eventually hanged. After leaving Thieves Wood, we crossed the road of the A60 and now heading through Harlow Wood. Now we're walking towards Fountaindale, a famous spot for Friar Tuck. So, if you've lost your knickers, they're here in the Harlow Woods. How he lost them, I don't know. So, on this stand would have been this, telling you the story of Fountaindale and of Friar Tuck. Just walking away from the track, we come across this lake. And this is the lake that's just in front of the old priory of Fountaindale. Now this building is a private residence, but the lake in front is to be believed where Friar Tuck met Robin Hood. Robin came across the friar asleep by the stream when he was at fishing. He woke him and forced the friar to ferry him across the water on his back. Halfway across, the friar tipped Robin into the water and a fight began that lasted for hours. At the end of it, both men were utterly exhausted, but each had earned the other's respect and they became firm friends. We continue on the path, and this time we're going to head up to the moat and where Friar Tuck's home used to be, the Hermit's Cave. Interesting sign inside the woods. No sign of development or building anywhere near. So what's it meant to be for? I do not know. Again, answers on a postcard or maybe in the comments. Just deviating from the path, we come to Friar Tuck's well, and at a point along this track, according to legend, was a tax point where the sheriff's men collected revenue for King John from the local forest folk. Local tradition has it that when Friar Tuck was evicted from the cell after 7 years of residence, the well dried up for the same length of time due to a curse placed on it by the canons of Newstead. Ever since, it has only flowed every 7th year. As I look under the undergrowth of where Friar Tuck's well is meant to be found, I come across this tree. It's got these little bumps along. First I thought they were snails or something. It looks like the tree's got measles. There you go, all the way up to the roof of the tree. No idea what that is. I haven't seen that on a tree before. After a bit of foraging around, now I can see these steps to my right hand side. Now that does show in previous pictures online of some steps next to the well, but now there is a little bit of a wall being built, which does look quite new. I think it's a bit of overflow from one lake to the other, which is now The old well is under mud and slurry. I can see it now, just in amongst the trees. I will put a little arrow to point out where it is. It's not that clear to see, but you can just see. I thought it was a tree root, but I've just noticed it's with the well itself. Do I believe that the story of Robin Hood, fact or fiction? Well, I believe he's a legend, and there's so many stories, different locations along the trail that I'm walking today that would make me believe that Robin Hood is real. So we've just left the bridleway. As we still head along the Robin Hood's way, we go past Providence Farm and take the track up to the road near Scarecrow Farm. When we think about the stories of Robin Hood, we always seem to think of Nottingham Castle. As most castles were built in medieval times, we would think that Robin Hood started in the 13th or 14th century. And many people do believe that. But on the other hand, some of the buildings that Robin Hood was meant to have gone to weren't built to the 17th century. Personally, I think it's around the 17th century. So we've just left the road and we're heading up New Lane to the top of the hill where there's a mast. Something tells me that barn needs some due care and attention. Just lean against it may make it collapse. As we walk up the hill towards the church, the cottages in front of us, in particular the one that's slightly elevated, is believed to be where Maid Marian grew up with her family. As we walk up the hill, we reach the pub called the Bird in Hand. Now this is an old dwelling place of Robin Hood. As I'll show you in a moment, we're in the beer garden at the Bird in the Hand pub, and we're looking down over Sherwood Forest down towards Blidworth bottom. Now Robin and his men used to sit up here looking down onto the fields below, waiting for the clergymen to be walking up from Blidworth bottoms. And when the clergymen did come up, they were used to be carrying the king's gold, taking it up to King John up at Clipston. And then once the monks were seen coming up from Blidworth bottoms, Robin and his men would go over to Thieves Wood, which was about 3 miles away from here, and then they would wait in the trees until the monks came up and they would rob them, which is the king's taxes, and take it for the poor. So I've just left the Bird in Hand pub, as we see in front of us. I was just talking to the landlady, and she was talking to me that there's some caves underneath the Bird in Hand that lead up to the church. So the Bird in Hand pub in July has a festival called Blidfest, which is bands playing at this pub here. We've just left the road and we've entered the grounds of St Mary's of the Purification in Blidworth. It is slightly dark because it is winter. As we follow the path round, now in front of me is believed to be the gravestone of Will Scarlett. So who was Will Scarlett? So he was often depicted as a young or youthful young man in the traditional tales. He was believed to be hot-headed but has a love of fine elegant clothes and often seen wearing red silk. He was the most skilled swordsman of the merry men, whilst Robin Hood is the most skilled archer and Little John the most skilled staff welder. In some tales, Scarlett uses 2 swords at the same time. Will Scarlett was killed after a battle with the sheriff's men and is buried in the churchyard in front. Maid Marian used to worship here as a young girl, and this is the place where Robin Hood came across Maid Marian, and eventually they were married in Edwinstone by Friar Tuck. So that's another day for another walk. Blidworth, or Blidworth as it was renowned in Old Forest lore, the villages of Blidworth, Fishpool, Farnsfield and Larch Farm each provided 100 head of live deer per annum to be kept at Fountaindale until required by the Crown for both table and hunting. So now we leave Blidworth, and as we can see, the sun is setting. Now hopefully you've enjoyed it and you've found out some interesting things about Robin Hood. But we're going to actually continue this story in Edwinstone, where Robin Hood married Maid Marian. Now we're going to walk along the main road, which just seems to be a busy road, into Ravenshead, which is about a mile, and that's where we finish the walk for today.